Solomon never thought his poems would start a war. He had always been the quiet type, the kind of guy who preferred silence over small talk. He lived in the city, on the edge of nowhere, in a little upstairs apartment stacked above a bookstore that never had enough customers. And all he ever really wanted was to write something that made people feel warm inside. Not explode into riots. But all of that changed the night he met Ember. Her wings blotted out the moon when she arrived. Ember crashed into his world, scaring half the block into thinking it was the end of days. But Solomon wasn't scared like the others. Instead, he grabbed his old leather notebook and went outside, scribbling a verse that simply read, "Even dragons deserve to fall in love." Ember was confused by him at first. Everyone else screamed. Solomon offered her tea. Ember came to Earth on a diplomatic mission. Twilight Sparkle had convinced her to try meeting other civilizations, spreading the message of harmony and understanding beyond Equestria. Ember wasn't thrilled about it. She hated group meetings and diplomatic ceremonies, and she really hated hugs. But Twilight had that look in her eyes, like one more mission might finally prove Ember was more than a little princess. So Ember came to Earth, and by chance she met Solomon. Ember had no idea how to talk to a human. She thought all their clothes were weird, and she kept forgetting who was who. She didn't like cities. They had too many signs and too much smoke. There were too many eyes on her all the time, and there was no sense of privacy at all. But there was something about Solomon's stillness that made her feel calm inside. He read her poetry. Ember hated poetry before she met Solomon, but eventually it made her wings twitch more and more. She didn't tell him at first. Dragons don't melt. Dragons roar. But every time Solomon wrote something new, like some new verse about her eyes, or her stubborn streak, or the way her voice sounded like thunder with a soft edge, Ember felt something tickle her inside of her, between her hooves. One day, someone took a picture of them together. The image spread across the internet like wildfire. Ember, curled protectively around Solomon on the rooftop of the bookstore. His hand was against her scale-covered snout. They looked beautiful together, but Earth hated it. The backlash was immediate. People called Solomon a traitor to humanity. They called Ember a monster. They said it was unnatural, disgusting, a violation of every moral code. Politicians held press conferences against her. Countries banned humans from dating dragons. Riots broke out all over the world, and churches declared war. But still, Solomon stood by her side and defended his love for her. Solomon's friends left in disagreement with his love for Ember. Solomon's job fired him immediately. His family sent death threats instead of carrying letters. But every night, he returned to Ember's cave outside the city limits, in an old ravine she carved into home. He'd bring poems. She'd bring roasted marshmallows that were slightly charred by accident. They would continue to laugh together. Sometimes they argued, but they always healed and ended their days with love. Until one day, the riots found them in her secret hiding spot. It happened on a Tuesday. Ember had flown into the city alone, hoping to speak at a Peace and Progress conference Twilight arranged through the Princess Council. Solomon stayed behind, working on his latest poem titled, "When Fire is the Only Light Left." But the conference was a trap. Protesters stormed the building. Some were armed with guns and knives. One of the protesters threw firecrackers at her. Ember panicked. All the sounds and bright lights of flashes and screams reminded her of the war she'd fought for the Dragon Scepter. She didn't fight back, but the guards did. In the chaos, Ember flew out a broken window, wounded and angry, and barely escaping the crush of people clawing for her blood. She returned to her secret home cave. She was bleeding from a cut under her wing and panting from all the thick smoke that got into her lungs. Solomon was quietly waiting for her when she arrived. "Get in," she growled as she opened her giant mouth wide open and signaled to Solomon to hop inside. "Wah! It's not safe out here anymore. And I don't want to lose you." Solomon blinked in confusion. His heart started racing. He didn't know what she was asking him to do, but he agreed with a nod. "I'm ready." Being swallowed was nothing like Solomon expected. It wasn't completely dark, like what Solomon was expecting it to be like in there. As he slid past her massive tongue and down her throat, her body responded with gentle contractions that guided him downward like a hug made of muscle and heat. He felt her heartbeat around him. It was pounding loud all around him. When he entered her stomach, he gasped in astonishment. It was beautiful. He never thought he could be attracted to a stomach before. But he was in love with how beautiful and spacious her stomach was. Her inner stomach chamber was soft and glowed with a rose-colored light. Her stomach was lined with a strange, silky membrane that cushioned his every step. Solomon loved walking through that silky texture. Whenever Solomon would make love with his ex-girlfriends, he would imagine his whole body being inside of them. Now he was completely submerged into Ember's stomach, drenched in all her love fluid from within. This was a dream to Solomon. Warmth radiated from every surface and in every direction. The warmth was so pleasant and soothing, almost spa-like. And the air shimmered with a vapor that smelled faintly like cinnamon and firewood. Solomon's whole body lit up with excitement from being inside. The best part of Ember's stomach was that it breathed. Her stomach lining gently pulsed, but the walls never squeezed too hard. It was cozy, like being wrapped in a wet cocoon of lovemaking. A place made just for him. She had adjusted to hold him consciously. Her draconic body was massive, but was able to reshape itself just enough to cradle the one thing she couldn't let the world take. Solomon laid down with a relaxed sigh and proceeded to unbutton his pants, kick off his shoes, and enjoy his time there inside of Ember. Days passed. Then weeks had passed. Solomon started decorating his new home. Ember had went to the store and purchased a waterproof journal for Solomon. Ember swallowed a bunch of various decorations so that Solomon could make a home inside of her. Solomon hung his poems on the walls with little hooks Ember crafted from her claws. She swallowed a few gifts for him too. Things like tiny lights powered by enchanted crystals from Equestria, a blanket made by Rarity, a pillow that smelled like Fluttershy's garden. Twilight swallowed books encapsulated in waterproof covers. Ember learned swallowing the books with the pages left open would dry out her throat, so it was best to swallow those pages with lots of water. Every night, Ember would murmur her thoughts through her stomach walls, and checking on Solomon. "Still alive in there, my dear poet?" "Yes," Solomon would whisper. "Still warm?" He'd recite poems through her scales. She'd listen while flying. And slowly she changed. Ember began liking poetry. She asked him to write one about her wings. Then her fire. Then her fear. She stopped flinching when he told her he loved her. Once, when he said she was more than a dragon lord, more than royalty, more than scales and smoke, she let out a shaky sigh and whispered, "Don't stop saying that." And she didn't hate hugs anymore. Maybe only his. She was beginning to appreciate the feeling of another's touch on her body. And she was enjoying every second of the pleasure she was receiving from Solomon. Solomon awoke to the sound of her growling. It vibrated through the stomach walls like thunder. The sound was just loud enough to jolt him upright from the soft bedding he had made from Ember's enchanted cloth swallows. The glow crystals flickered with her rising heartbeat. Something was wrong. He pressed a hand against the inner lining of her belly and called out softly, "Ember?" She didn't respond right away, but he felt her body shift around uncomfortably. He could feel her muscles tightening around him for a moment, then relaxed. Her heartbeat was usually a steady rhythm, but now it was hammering with greater force and speed. Finally, her voice came low and sharp, "We've got company." Dozens of autonomous drones buzzed through the air. They were sent by a coalition of militarized nations that had declared dragons a threat to biological purity. Most of the world's governments had collapsed into splinter factions, and one particularly violent group calling themselves the Order of Purity had risen, promising to restore the human spirit. Their target was Ember, or rather, what she represented. The love of Ember and Solomon was the type of love that disobeyed species, and their affection was the kind that defied their rules. So Ember flared her wings and dived headfirst at them. Below her, the forest was beginning to divide into a war. The secret cave she had made a home was no longer hidden. She knew it was marked on every radar, tagged by satellites, and surrounded by loudspeakers that barked nonsense about cleansing the unnatural. Inside her belly, Solomon heard none of this. He had no idea what panic and violence was happening outside of Ember's stomach. He only felt her flight accelerate and her warmth sharpening with adrenaline. "I'm sorry," Ember muttered, audible only to herself and the man inside her. "I didn't want you to feel this." She dipped low, skimming treetops. But the drones followed her every turn. Solomon held onto the walls as gently as he could, riding out the violent maneuvering. He felt her heart tighten and imagined her expression. He knew Ember's moods by pulse and breath now. A fast rhythm meant anger. A sudden stillness meant regret. And right now, she was somewhere between panic and don't-you-dare-touch-him mode. An idea for his poetry came to him in that instant. He reached for his journal. His pen scratched a hurried verse onto the membrane with glowing ink that read, "Let them fire, let them storm. You are the only sky I'll fly in." As he was writing those lines, the drones launched projectiles at Ember. These were missiles designed not to kill, but to incapacitate and extract. There were netting bombs, taser wires, and tranquilizer gas. Ember roared and twisted midair. Her tail was lashing back and forth like a whip. One of the nets struck her wing, causing her trajectory to dip violently. "No!" she screamed, regaining control just before impact. Her flight faltered but held. Smoke was bleeding from her nostrils as her rage kindled. "Solomon," she growled, "hold tight." And then she turned around. Dragons don't flee. Running away wasn't in Ember's blood. She hadn't fought Garble for the Bloodstone Scepter just to run from some tin-plated human tech. She wasn't about to lose Solomon the same way she lost her father's respect, by playing it safe. So she charged with the utmost determination. Ember rocketed through the formation of drones, flames bursting from her mouth, melting circuits and boiling code. Her body blazed with fury. She didn't need any pony's help. She had fire and a soul worth fighting for. Then she started seeing progress. The drones started to fall, one by one, dying in a whirlwind of smoke. Ember spun into the clouds, roaring with breathless fury, and vanished over the sea. They landed far from civilization, in the charred basin of a volcanic island that Ember remembered from dragon migration days. The lava here was dormant. The world didn't know it existed, so it was quiet and safe. Inside her, Solomon felt her settle into this peaceful spot. "Is it over?" he asked softly. She hesitated. "For now." "Are you okay?" Solomon inquired curiously. Ember's voice was gravel and honey. "I'm pissed. But I didn't lose you. So, I guess I'm okay." Solomon lit his fire crystal lamp and took out his notebook. Ember had calmed down by now. Her stomach was no longer trembling. Solomon pressed a fresh page to the warm wall and began to write, speaking aloud so she could hear every word. "You are not fire that destroys. You are fire that refuses to go out, even when the world pours oceans to smother it, even when they say you don't deserve to burn." There was silence for a long moment. Then Ember chuckled a little and said, "I actually don't hate that one." Solomon smiled. "I'm gonna write a whole book of poems about you." "That's weird," she replied. "I know," Solomon said, "but I want the world to know of our love." She was quiet again. Then Ember replied, "I guess it'd be weirder if you stopped writing poetry." Inside her stomach, Solomon carved a small bookshelf, using a curved claw she passed to him during one of their quieter moments. The membrane absorbed his scent, his poems, his stories, and held onto them like keepsakes. He called it the Belly Library. And in this strange sanctuary, protected from the world's war and hate, Solomon lived. He had no windows to the outside world, but he had warmth and Ember's undying love. He had no sky to look up at, but he had a beating heart that lit the darkness for him every night. And slowly, Ember learned not just how to hold Solomon inside of her, but how to love the idea that someone wanted to stay inside her forever.